This episode is sponsored by Active 911, a respected leader in the emergency communication and software field, providing alerting, mapping, and scene resources for over 500,000 first responders worldwide. Now, as you know, I only bring sponsors on this show who are A, coming from an altruistic place, and B, truly bringing solutions to problems. And the origin story of Active 911 begins with volunteer firefighter and tech entrepreneur Joseph Sullivan. After missing a critical call from a dispatch error, Joseph set out to create a solution to ensure that we are not only dispatched on time, but also provide us with resources and information for the call and location. So there are 3 different products under the Active 911 umbrella. The first is Active Alert, a dispatch system integrated into a CAD connection, providing fast, reliable alerting, maps, data, pre-plans, hydrant locations, and even the locations of incoming units and their specialties. The second arm is Active Comms. Now, many of us have experienced problems when it came to communication using our traditional radios, so Active 911 found a way of tapping into the incredible capabilities of modern-day smartphones and integrate that into our communication, providing both increased range and low latency. So to learn more about Active 911 or to try their free trial, go to active911.com. And if you want to hear more about the origin and spectrum of products that they offer, listen to episode 1243 of the Behind the Shield podcast with the creator and founder, Joseph Sullivan. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show veteran firefighter and the vice president of the IAFF 12th District, Walt Dix. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the fire service back in the 1970s, the evolution and devolution of the fire service through his eyes, firefighter mental health, a powerful perspective on the FLSA and our shift work, how the 2472 is bringing both physical and mental health back to the fire service, some of his own notable calls, forging performance, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Walt Dix. Enjoy. Well, Walt, I want to start by saying 2 things. Firstly, your name has come up many, many times when I ask people for guest recommendations. So, you have been, this conversation is a long time coming. And secondly, I want to welcome you today onto the Behind the Shield podcast.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on here. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. You've done some really amazing work, and it's been extremely helpful to the fire service.
Yeah, well, mine goes back far less time than yours. So we're going to take into, look at your journey and the impact that you've had. But I appreciate that. But I'm looking to hear more about all the advocacy that you've done. So let's start at the very beginning. Tell me where you were born, and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic. What your parents did. How many siblings?
Okay, so I have one sister who's older than I am. My parents immigrated from Europe. My mother was from Germany. My father was from England. They met over in Germany right after the war. And then decided to come to Florida and start a family in Florida. So I was first born in Florida. My sister was born in Berlin, Germany. And I started my life here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and been here ever since, native.
What stories did you hear about their experience from the war? Because what a interesting, relationship that you have, these two, this man, this woman, that are, on air quotes, opposing, forces. But obviously there's a nuanced conversation to every conflict. There are the people that are actually wanting to fight, and then there's the rest of the people just trying to live their lives. So what were their war experiences? And then tell me more about how they met, because that's fascinating.
Yeah, so the experience was amazing. I mean, my grandfather had an air conditioning and heating business, so he had to, keep everything running, so to speak, in Berlin during that really difficult time. And then the Allied troops came in, and my mother's view of that when I spoke to her was, this is great. This is, freeing us from, all this persecution. And, they saw everything that was happening around them. And they were just so happy to welcome in the American troops and the British troops. And then they met, shortly thereafter, and struck up a romance, and lived in Germany for quite a while. My dad was attached to the Royal Corps of Engineers from the British forces, and then was brought in to help construct the first NATO headquarters in Germany. And so that's where everything kind of came together for them. And then after that job was completed, he got out of the military and decided that it was time to start a new adventure. So they wanted to come to the United States. And they always read about Florida and thought that would be the perfect weather environment. And interestingly enough, they couldn't get in. They couldn't get here right away. So they ended up going to Cuba and living in Havana for 3 years. And then after they got clearance to come to Florida, they did in 1957, I believe, was about the time that my parents came to Fort Lauderdale. And my dad started working on high-rise construction buildings all up and down the coast in Florida here. And so I was born in 1959 as a native here, and been here ever since. And it's been just fantastic journey. But to listen to those stories when they were alive was amazing. It really did. It really does shape you as to, what can happen in the world.
But it also highlights, something that the biggest storytellers are our military themselves, no matter where they are. I just had Rich Rice from GoRuck, who's a incredible man, plank holder of Delta. His first deployment was Vietnam. His last was Mogadishu. So you think about what he's seen and done. And he was in Iran, at that time doing some, secret squirrel stuff. But he said again, that there was just families just trying to get on with their day. And they looked like the families that were in, the UK and in America. And it's the same thing that we're told that Russia is bad, or whatever the country is at the moment. It's like, I'm sure the majority of Russia did not wake up that morning and go, I really want to invade Ukraine. They just want to get up and feed the kids, go to their air conditioning business, and keep the roof over their heads. So what a beautiful story to underline the humanity behind a lot of these atrocities and conflicts that we still see today.
Yeah. Yeah, I can tell you, my mom was ecstatic when the Berlin Wall came down because they didn't live too far from it. And I had traveled to Germany probably every year up until I was in my mid-20s. We would go every summer and visit family over there. And it was very different while Berlin was occupied until the wall came down. And then things changed dramatically there. I remember one time I was about 6 years old, and we were traveling over to Berlin, and we were going through customs, and they made me go in a separate line by myself. And my mother was like ecstatic, like, what's going on here? I mean, she was not very happy that I was being separated from her. And they said, well, all Americans have to go in this line and everybody else has to go over here. And there were armed guards everywhere. And I was just a little lad. And so, I did what I was told. But then to get to Berlin at that time when the wall was still up, you could only travel at night. So you had to go on a train that had no windows. It was all closed up, and you would travel at nighttime because they didn't want you to see anything. So it was an experience that really stuck with me.
It's crazy. If you ever seen Turning Point, the documentary, and one of the ones they did was the Cold War, and there's another one on Vietnam, and those two obviously overlap as well. But
Right.
even you have the East and the West, but then within the city you have the
Yeah.
East and the West as well. But outside the city is, I forget if it's in the West, I think. So you've got even this cage, as it were, for the East Berliners within this otherwise free nation. So it was such a bizarre,
Totally bizarre.
environment. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
So what about the immigration story? How were they received initially, whether it was Cuba or ultimately the U.S., coming from
Well,
their background?
with my father's, military background and construction service, engineer, structural engineer, he was very well received, got work very easily, and had a specialty in his construction trade. So he was very sought after in the high rise community, building all the high rises, because back in the 50s, early 60s is when a lot of these buildings were starting to go up along the ocean side. So he was very gainfully employed for that time. And we just loved it here. It was great. They just loved being here.
Did he ever have any regrets later on in life when that became a sea of high rises along our southern coasts there, of maybe there's needing to be some limitations if they could do it again?
No, I didn't really see that. I mean, my father died quite a while ago when I was very young. I was only in my early 20s, and he had a, unfortunate illness and death. So I never saw that from him. He was just very proud of all the buildings that he was able to be a part of, and see them rise up, and how impressive they were, because people hadn't seen that before.
And what about through your eyes now as a young person, compared to what we're seeing in South Florida these days, what did it look like back then? Because I can imagine the landscape was quite different than 2026.
Oh, it was way different. I mean, the beaches were, let's say, free and easy to get to, easy access. Today, not so much. Parking was right on the beach. You could pull your car right up to the sand and get out and go enjoy the beach. And today, that's just not the case. There's no parking along the beach now. If you go down to Fort Lauderdale Beach, you have to park on some of the side streets. And then, everything down there has been, gentrified, revitalized, and reconstructed. It's absolutely beautiful, but totally different from back in the day.
What about sports and exercise? What were you playing and doing as a young boy in school?
So in school, I was a part of the band. We were in a marching band, so we did a lot there. I stayed very active, played a little bit of baseball, a little bit of basketball. Wasn't a super athlete, I would say, or anything, but enjoyed playing musical instrument. I took up trombone, played in, like I said, in the marching band. I played in a concert band, and eventually ended up in a jazz band, and did some work and a couple of recordings with a jazz band back, in the high school days. So that was a lot of fun.
What about career aspirations? Were you dreaming of taking that into adulthood as a career, or did you have something else in mind back then?
So I think my career aspiration was, which is quite normal, is looking at what my father did. I said, I think I want to be an architect. I think that would be really cool to get in the construction business. So I started immediately out of high school and decided I was going to go to college and become an architect. And I'm not very good at drawing. And that just did not sit well with me. I was more of an outdoorsy person. I liked being outdoors, camping, fishing, hiking, boating. And so the college route didn't resonate. I did that for about a year and then decided I needed to go a different direction.
So, what made you start considering the fire service?
Well, it was actually just hanging out with a couple of friends, and uh, we all. I'll back up a bit. So, as soon as I got out of high school, myself and three other friends decided we were going to go on this long trek. So we bought a little camper, and the four of us went from Fort Lauderdale to Montana and back over a 2.5 month period. We just wanted to explore the whole country. And so during that time, we got to talking. What do we want to do? What does everybody want to do? And we all kind of gravitated towards, being a firefighter might be, kind of a cool idea. And so when we got back, we all went our own way. College didn't work out. So it wasn't a year later that I saw a sign that said that they were taking applications for firefighters, and decided to go in and apply. And quite different than it is today. I had to apply with two other people. So three of us competed for the job. And I ended up, getting the job, and it was wonderful. Best thing I ever did. Ended up working in the Lauderdale by the Sea area. We had independent fire districts back then, and the county had 14, 16 different fire districts that covered all of Broward County, along with some of the major cities that you know of today. But a lot of the smaller cities didn't exist back then. And so these fire districts started hiring firefighters because volunteers were starting to fade a bit. And that's where I kind of cut my teeth and began my career. And it was everything I thought it would be. It was fantastic, exciting, and enjoyable.
There's a lot of conversation at the moment that volunteerism is dead, and it's almost painted as a negative. Well, we can't staff these stations because no one wants to volunteer anymore. And there's obviously an equally important part of this conversation, especially in areas like New Jersey, which is, well, why have you been using volunteers to staff fire stations in suburban neighborhoods with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the population? So, but you've got an interesting perspective because obviously that was the norm back then in a lot of these areas. So back in the mid to late 70s, what was happening with the volunteer side? And then talk to me about that, because it's almost like the beginning of the career department that is obviously flourishing these days.
Yeah, so we had active volunteers in all these fire districts, but the county fire commissioners, they had a fire commission back then. They had appointed officials that oversaw these fire districts. I think they saw the handwriting on the wall. A lot of the fire chiefs in these fire districts were actually transplants from up north. They came from New York, New Jersey, those areas. They did a full career in the fire service in a professional department up north, and they came down here and they either became volunteer fire chiefs, assistant chiefs, and started to build up the fire service in South Florida. And then eventually they saw the need to put firefighters on, mostly in the daytime, because volunteers were still responding in the evenings, but they were working full-time jobs. And so there weren't any personnel to respond during the daytime hours. So the initial hirings in the fire districts back in the late 70s was a 40-hour job that transitioned very quickly into a 24-hour job because of the lack of personnel that were available. And volunteers stayed for quite a long time, but they began to fade out over time, as they do in a lot of metropolitan areas. I think volunteerism is still alive in a lot of the rural communities where they don't have the tax base necessarily to support a professional fire service, or they don't have the call volume. And so they've got to come up with something. I know in North Carolina, where I've spent a lot of time, there are a lot of volunteer fire departments that are going through a similar transition that I saw here in Florida, where they're starting to put on firefighters during the week on 40 hours and starting to put one or two people on a 24-hour shift so they have somebody there all the time. So there is that transition going on everywhere.
It's interesting because I know obviously we're going to take a deep dive into this in a little bit, but we found ourselves with the 56-hour work week being the accepted one. And we'll talk about FLSA and some other things in a moment. But as you mentioned, initially it was a 40-hour work week. How did that devolve to 56?
Well, it was easy change. I mean, it went from I'm working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, to I'm working 24 hours a day every 3 days. So that was a natural progression. There was a lot of talk about a New York schedule. Back in those days, like FDNY, I'll use that as an example, they worked a 10-14 schedule. So they worked days and nights alternating. And that was never really popular down here in Florida. Florida was always kind of a 24-hour shift schedule. So it just evolved into that, where as volunteers were fading, we needed to have at least one person every day and then two people every day. And then that just, began to grow. And you saw some stations that were fully volunteer and some stations that were fully career paid. And they just, meshed together and worked together. And then others where you just had to supplement a driver, engineer, and an officer, and then a supplemental workforce would come in to help out. But as people got busier, they got full-time careers, those things start to fade. People get older, they're, not going to necessarily participate in firefighting activities as they get into their 60s or so, let's say. They start to fade off from the volunteer force.
What about operationally? What were the kind of rigs that you were riding back then? And talk to me about PPE, SCBAs, etc.
So PPE was extremely poor. I mean, it was begged, borrowed, traded. I remember we had hip boots to start with. We didn't have bunker pants. The material the coats were made of were cotton, flannel lining, Nomex, not very fire resistant to compared to what we had today. I mean, the technology just has advanced so far today from, where it was. We had to buy our own gloves. Everybody did not get a mask. You had to share your face pieces. So that was part of the daily routine. You'd come to work and first thing you would do is check out the apparatus and clean all the face pieces because there weren't individually assigned face pieces for the SCBAs. And then if you wanted bunker pants, you had to go buy your own. And that was frowned upon sometimes by some of the older personnel as, you're being a wimp if you put on bunker pants. But I can remember buying my own very first pair because I learned a lot in the fire academy, the importance of our turnout gear.
What about the rigs themselves? I was early in my career, I rode an open cab truck until we ended up getting a tiller to replace it. And so I got a slight glimpse into those days, like bunkering up at 80 miles an hour on a freeway with no seatbelt, trying not to fall off. What kind of rigs were you riding back then?
So we had American LaFrance. We did have some Seagrave apparatus. A lot of the apparatus that they had in the departments in my particular area were secondhand, came from up north. Open cab. We started out riding on the tailboard. That was absolutely crazy. because you'd like jump on the back of the tailboard and try to get dressed on the way to the call. I mean, just not a good practice. And that went into as firefighters were getting more and more injured riding on the tailboard back then, they started strapping us to the tailboard. And that was even worse because if you got in an accident, you were stuck. So we had these straps that we had to put on to hook on to the rear of the apparatus. Finally, that went away, thank God. And, we were banned from riding the tailboard and put into the jump seats. But the jump seats were open, like you said. There weren't any seat belts. And then eventually they put little bars in that would go up and down. They called them man savers that went on the apparatus that were supposed to hold you into the jump seat until we went to a closed cab system. But it was quite a bit different. We did not have SCBA in the cab of the apparatus. We started creating all of our own devices to put the SCBA in the cab of the apparatus because we wanted to be prepared to go to work when we got to the call. And it just was very difficult. When you pull up on the call, you got to jump out of the apparatus and you got to go run to the back and put your SCBA on. So that all changed dramatically to where we are today. And that's a really good thing, what I saw.
It's interesting because when I started my career, I was on the regular training and then on an engine in Hialeah. And so everything was in the cab. And then when I got to Anaheim, like I said, we ended up getting tillers. And I was assigned to, one of the brand new tillers. And me and my partner, we rotated on who was a tillerman that day. And as a tillerman, you don't have the SCBA in the cab because you're all the way at the top. It's a very small area.
Right.
So, you climb down, you throw your pack on. And meanwhile, obviously, your captain is surveying the scene and about to tell you what you're going to do. And so then you have this modern conversation of, clean cabs, stop grabs. And of course, there's a middle ground. But the fallacy that you're also going to leap off a fire engine, run straight into a burning building is also bullshit. That's not a truth either. But having it, I think having it right by the cab, where you can immediately grab it without running to the side of the truck, whilst you're looking at the building yourself, whilst you're listening to your instructions from your LT or your captain, and then, it's literally 10 seconds to throw a pack on and, cinch everything down, if that, and then you're ready to go. So I love, the readiness of some of the things that we've done, but then you've got that pack that's obviously now absorbed all the carcinogens in the fire. I actually like going back to the cab, the SCBA being on the outside, because you're also not carrying that extra weight as you're clambering down out of the vehicle. It's, it's less opportunity to take your seatbelt off en route, which is normally when we do, when we're packing up. So that glimpse as a tillerman in a Californian truck company changed the way I look at the SCBA being on the inside, as long as you're well trained and fluid and make sure you can get your pack on quickly and then go to work.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I was going to say, our firefighters are very ingenuitive. They like to build things and create things. And so because our air packs were all in the back, our guys started creating these fabricated holders out of PVC pipe. And they used old license plates and metal. And these would hang over the front seat because we used to have just a big, wide front seat in the cab of the trucks. They weren't individual seats. And we would put the air pack in there, and then you would pack up and jump out. And what we started noticing is, like you were alluding to, a lot of knee and ankle injuries because you were coming out of the truck, with this pack on, and it didn't make any sense. It really didn't. And so moving them to the back, now that we recognize all the carcinogens in our gear and our equipment, makes all the sense in the world. And it gives the officer an extra 30 seconds, I think, to do a proper size up, so you can see, what are we getting into? And that was one thing I always taught my crew is it may seem like it's going to be 10 minutes or whatever, but it's only going to be about 30 seconds. And I don't want you to move. I just want you to let me figure out what we're going to do and give you the plan and let's go to work.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can even, I mean, you can have your mask on, your hood, your helmet, everything else can be on. It's just the pack that's on the outside. You throw it over like a jacket, cinch it down, off you go. So,
Right. Right.
what about the idiosyncrasies of the time? The vehicles, I remember early in my career, right, 2000, 2003, when I first entered the academy, hearing about the older 1980s vehicles, that looked like they were fine on the outside and three dead bodies on the inside. Now, in our modern times, it looks like everyone died and everyone was fine because of the crumple zones. So from a
Right.
vehicle wreck, or even people say the fires are hotter now, but were they? I mean, plastics and all those things were still around 20, 30, 40 years ago. So what were some of the idiosyncrasies of the times when you first entered the profession, and what are some of the myths maybe that you hear people talking about the time that you were a firefighter when you first entered?
Well, just looking at the apparatus, the tools, the equipment, everything has evolved tremendously. I mean, we were a very progressive department. We were very, um, let's say, understaffed. We didn't have a full complement as you would under 1710 today, responding to a fire. So we had to be very aggressive and efficient. And so you learn to adapt and you learn to employ all the latest and greatest equipment. I can remember back in 1980, we started utilizing 4-inch large diameter hose. That was extremely foreign in 1980 to most departments. They just thought, that was nuts. What are you doing? But it was a huge advancement for us to be able to use a large diameter hose, especially in rural areas where you need to transport the water long distances. You don't have a hydrant every 500 to 1,000 feet. So it made a big difference. And then, the evolution of the nozzles, just seeing, the Florida was big into, having a fog nozzle and, looking at the change in strategy and tactics over time. I did a lot of teaching at the Fire Academy, did a lot of work trying to research what the best piece of equipment was at the time. And we converted everything from fog nozzles to solid stream nozzles because they seem to be much more effective. As far as the fires, I think they were just as hot back then as they are today. I mean, yes, the contents may be a little different. It may be more toxic, let's say, in the contents today than we had back then. But, being a Florida firefighter, our construction was, concrete block construction. So if you were in a high rise, it was poured concrete construction. If you were in a single family home, it was, concrete block construction. So that was extremely hot. You had to get in there and appropriately ventilate. We did have a lot of old, what we call Dade County pine homes in Florida. In South Florida, they had a lot of wooden homes, but those I think have all since gone away, but we use a lot of those for training. And so some of the myths, I guess, were that, you needed to go in and feel the fire and, get burned on your ears to know when to get out. I was never a fan of that. When we started introducing hoods into the fire service, that was frowned upon by the senior firefighters, that we didn't have our thermometers appropriately, gauged where we could tell what the temperature was inside to know when a flashover was going to occur to be able to get out. Obviously, now we have much more technology surrounding that, but I remember getting burned at, when I went through the Fire Academy, and then I got burned later on in my career pretty severely. And, the gear is very, very important, and it's what protects us. I mean, it was a fight to get our members to wear SCBAs on car fires and on overhauls and dumpster fires. I mean, so evolutionary, when I started out, we had booster lines, which were 20 or 30 gallons a minute on a fire apparatus, and eventually those went away, and we went to 1.5 inches and then 1.75 inches.
I had one of the former training chiefs from Chicago FD on the show a while ago, and he was talking about people opening windows as you go on advancing a hose line. He said, "You know why they do that?" Or it was advancing or a search, I forget. And and he said, people have said, well, it's this and the flow pattern and all this stuff. He's like, no, it's like when we didn't have SCBAs at all, that's where they would take a breath and then advance forward. And this is what's interesting. Being trained in Florida, going to California for a few years on a truck company, cutting roofs, and then coming back to the East Coast and people saying, oh, but it's, it's so dangerous to do it. And it's different here. We have lightweight truss. And like the whole building is lightweight in California. It's all made of wood. But it's about understanding building construction, knowing when to cut, knowing when not to cut. But then I started really getting this perspective of, wow, there's a lot of myths in the fire service, or a lot of things that we do that really people don't understand. Like, for example, a car fire. A car fire is a Class B fire. It's gas, it's rubber, it's plastic, and you're not saving anything. And yet, like you said, we go with no SCBA, no mask. Sometimes we get really close to it. The same with a dumpster fire. They're both the same kind of fire. You just drown it till, or put foam in it till it goes out. But how many lives do we risk fighting those fires? For what reason? So as I've learned more and more and seen how siloed the fire service is, it's created this danger where when good information isn't shared well from real authorities in their field, we create these myths that actually make it more dangerous for us.
Well, I believe, using air packs as an example, air was considered a commodity. That was a precious commodity back in the day. You would preserve your air because we didn't have fancy air trucks coming to refill everything. We didn't have fancy cascade systems at every fire station. We had our air packs on the truck, and then we had maybe one spare bottle for each air pack on the truck, maybe an extra one or two on top of that. And so you were sparingly using that air as a very precious commodity, which is why firefighters tended not to, well, I don't need it. There's not a lot of smoke here. It's just a little bit of smoke. And now we know, how that's impacted our health over time. And we've learned what's in a dumpster fire, what's in a car fire, what's in a contents and room fire. And so it took a long time for that evolution to change, to get firefighters. I mean, I told you, when I started, we shared masks. It was crazy. That was one of the big things we put in our first collective bargaining agreement, was that every firefighter would get their own SCBA mask. And you would have thought that management was thinking that we were nuts, how expensive that would be. But I mean, who would even think about sharing something like that today? It's ridiculous. So yeah, I agree with you. There are a lot of myths out there. I mean, in Florida, for example, I know in California, you do a lot of roofs. There weren't a lot of roof ventilations done in Florida because the room and contents fires in a concrete block structure were put out pretty rapidly. So there wasn't this, fire impingement in the roof and the attic like you see up north in different types of construction, wood frame construction, balloon frame construction. Obviously, you do a lot of roof ventilation on commercial buildings, but the bread and butter, kitchen fire, single family home, room and contents, we weren't on top of the roof, venting the roof here in our particular areas.
And I think that makes sense. And the house that I'm sitting in now is exactly that. Concrete block and a wood frame roof, and it's just what works. But I was literally hearing people say, it's so dangerous, and the reasons that they were saying it was dangerous didn't make any sense. I remember having a chief in Orange County saying the British firefighters never go interior. And I was like, that's just wrong. Now there's times where they don't, but go to the Grenfell fire. Look at the footage. Did they go interior there? Yeah. The hundreds of them risked their lives going, tens of floors up to go interior and get people and extinguish a fire. So, this is the problem if you just think that your department is the best in the country or the world, and you don't have the humility to ask other people, especially if they're, doing research, or, they're in an area of the country where they get a lot of high-rise fires or wildfires or whatever it is, then you can create a lot of very dangerous environments for your men and women.
Yeah, I think over time and through science research, testing, we learn a tremendous amount. I mean, we were always taught you got to get in there. You can't put water on that fire until you go in and find those victims. Otherwise, you're going to steam them to death and they're going to die from your putting water on the fire and trying to extinguish it. And over time and research and training, we found out that that's not necessarily true. That's, a complete falsehood. You could put water on the fire prior to going in and actually finding a victim and bringing them out. So there's, a lot that has been done over time that I think is embedded in, like you say, myth.
With our own people, the men and women that are on the rigs doing the job, with, for example, this 24/72 fight that I've been trying to do for literally almost 10 years now, it's incredible how much pushback you got from the actual firefighters. These are the people that are suffering from all the things that we talk about and are going to benefit from a healthy work week. And they're the ones poo-pooing it. They're the ones saying, oh, this will never work, or, the 4896 is the best, whatever it is. And it's maddening, because I get some bean counter that all he does is look at spreadsheets all day. But the people that are actually in there that don't see their kids because they get hit with a mandatory, you would think they would be the loudest voices. But as you alluded to, the opposition of, the SCBA itself, then, individual masks and, wearing SCBAs on dumpster fires and car fires, a lot of times it's our own people that are fighting. What is your perspective of that, and how do we change that culture where we're actually looking for innovation rather than fighting it?
Well, I think we're getting there. I think the more we educate our members and involve them in the process, the more that the fire service is going to evolve and change for the better. A lot of times it's, the old saying, right? Firefighters love change and they hate change. You bring them, something and talk to them about it, and they'll tell you every which way it's not going to work. And they don't want to change. But at the same time, they'll tell you we need to change. And so we've got to involve them in that educational process. And I think that's kind of how we have evolved with whether it's SCBA or, the type of hose that we use, the hose lines, the attack on fires. The more we involve our firefighters in that process and, hands-on. As far as the work schedules go, I think what we're seeing is some of our senior firefighters are just so comfortable in their work schedule. When we've gotten Kelly days, when you're on a 3-week Kelly day cycle, you bid a particular day, and I get a Sunday Kelly day, and I never work a Sunday, right? So I become very complacent and comfortable with that. And if you tell me, well, now you're going to have to work a Sunday every once in a while, but you're going to work less, you're going to be working 1 day on and 3 days off. I get very frustrated talking to firefighters about that myself, because I go, well, you're going from 48 to 42. You're working less. Your hourly rate's going up. You're making more money. You're going to be healthier. And they don't want to do that. They want to stay the way it is. They like change, but they want things to stay the way they are. And so we got to educate them. And we've done a really good job at that. I mean, just look at what we've done with cancer in the fire service and the exposure and the need for a medical exam every year and a cancer screening and PFAS. So, we are getting there. There's a lot of hope. There really is. What frustrates me is when I see people that are on a 56-hour work week and they want to go to like a 4896, which I think is just the most awful work schedule, because you're just in a lot of these departments, what I see is they're not working 48, 96. They're working 72, 72, because they got mandatory overtime or they got a holdover or they trade a shift. And, so it's not healthy for somebody to be there for, 2, let alone 3 days in a row. I know when we used to have to hold over for mandatory overtimes, it can be very stressful. And probably more so in departments that do EMS transport, because they're the ones that are extremely busy. So yeah, it can be very frustrating.
Absolutely.
But I mean, when we talk about that mold of like the 3-week Kelly day, I know a couple of departments have come up with some unique ways around that. So to break that mold of I get every Sunday off, we have one particular department that instead of going to a Kelly day every 7 shift, they do it every 6 shift. So what happens is every 3 weeks, your day moves backwards. So you never have the same day off. So I might have a Sunday Kelly day. 3 weeks from now, I'm going to have a Saturday Kelly day. And then 3 weeks from, so administratively, our managers like it because they don't have to go through all the bidding and the paperwork and all that. And eventually the firefighters get adapted to that and they like that. And so I think eventually firefighters will get adapted to a 1 on and 3 off schedule if we can convince more of them. And it seems like we are. I mean, I'm really excited about what I see around the state, all the conversation we're having, the contracts that are starting to be negotiated. I say this a lot. And I've gone head to head with a number of fire chiefs on it because they've run around the state and said we have a recruiting problem. And my pushback to the fire chiefs is we do not have a recruiting problem. We have a pay and benefit problem. And if you pay your firefighters correctly and you provide the correct work environment with the correct benefits and the correct work schedule, and you look at the departments that are doing that, they don't have a recruiting problem. It's the ones that don't have good pay, good benefits, good working conditions that have the recruiting problem. So I don't think we have a recruiting problem. I go back to we have a pay and benefit problem, and the chiefs need to work with us to address that.
Absolutely. So, well, I forget who it was. One of my guests recently mirrored that, and they said we don't have a recruitment problem, we have a retention problem. And it's absolutely true, and you look at, Boca Raton in Florida, for example, they were the anomaly, the rainbow, the unicorn and rainbow coming out of his ass. But, they always had lists, that was super, super deep, and they had people that stayed their full career, even as we started degrading, in other places. And the solution is there. And going back to the resistance of, these changes, the irony that really struck me recently is if you and I are on a rig and someone, calls 911 and we show up, we have to mitigate whatever that thing is. There's a plane crash into a tree. There's a kid got swept down a storm drain. There's a fire. There's a cardiac arrest. We have to use this diverse skill set that we have to make someone's worst day, not so bad. But when it comes to the fact that we have suicides and cancers and divorces and alcoholism and all the other things, we kind of just put our fingers, our hands in our pockets and shrug our shoulders. And if you think about it, that's going against the very core of the problem solving that is the fire service.
The good thing is the work we're doing in mental health and being able to identify that it's okay to say that I need some help or I have a problem. And we have just done a tremendous amount of work in the mental health arena. I fear the phone calls I get regularly. It's tragic. I just got one the other day. We just had another suicide. It's just like, continuing to be a repetitive thing that these firefighters aren't seeking the appropriate medical, mental assistance they need and committing suicide on such a high rate. And I do agree that it has to do with the working conditions. But we got to change that. We got to continue to push that forward and change it.
what's been interesting with this like decade long education I've had, because I've always said, like, I'm not the expert. I'm the person asking the experts the questions and hopefully sharing that with everyone else that, wants to hear it. But there are a few truths. Sleep deprivation, 100% irrefutably direct correlation with all things mental ill health. That's, ask the psychology, psychiatry world, they'll tell you that. But another big thing that was kind of really revealed to me through the founder of Save a Warrior was how many of us have an ACEs score, the Adverse Childhood Experience score, of 6 or more. And so, they see that in the military, and they also see that in incarcerated men and women. And the thing is, when you've been through some stuff, if you have a lucky enough to have had some positive mentors, then you're probably going to find yourself in a protector role. If you've been through some stuff and you have negative mentors, you're probably going to find yourself behind bars. So the opportunity at the front door to acknowledge that and say to these young men and women, we're going to go on the drill ground, we're going to pull hose, we're going to throw ladders, we're going to do PT. And during your probation, we're going to do X amount of counseling sessions. Because for you to operate at the highest level as a firefighter, we need your mind to be clear. So this is a performance conversation. But the fact that you are here, you have probably been through some things, and we're going to make that an absolute asset. That is going to be resilience. So I think if we can add that conversation into the things that we're already doing, you've normalized mental health at the front door. They've created a relationship with a counselor, whoever you have on your staff. And then, if and when there's a bad call, there's some, financial problems, there's friction in a marriage, they immediately know where they can go to and start addressing that early before it becomes a crisis.
Oh, I agree. And we at the IAFF have done a lot to educate our members by putting peer support programs together, advancing the mental health training, providing the counseling, our center of excellence. But you bring up a good point that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier with retention and recruitment. So it's not always just the pay and benefit issue. It's the way we advertise the job. It is going to be more difficult today to recruit new firefighters when it's much different than when I joined or when you joined. Because today I'm going to go to a young man or woman and say, this is a great job. It's the best job in the world, best job I ever had. But let me explain something to you. You're probably going to get cancer, and you're probably going to have a mental health crisis. You're not going to be a millionaire. And so you have a lot of obstacles there. So we have to couch that in a way that, hey, we're going to guide you through this journey. We're going to get you from the beginning to the end so you can have a wonderful retirement, enjoy life after the fire service. And the way we're going to do that is through mental health resiliency programs. We're going to do that through physical fitness. We're going to do that through annual cancer screenings, blood tests, PFAS, and advancing all of the equipment that we have, all of our protective equipment, our apparatus, all of that. We're going to do all that. So we got to do a better job of educating them on that. And we'll get more young people to be part of the fire service, because I think some people just get scared off right off the bat.
And I couldn't agree more. And I think this is it. Those red flags are real. And if we address them, then, we still include that in the conversation. We still educate, obviously, at the front door. Okay, these, especially on the mental health side, you are going to see some stuff that people shouldn't see. You're going to experience sleep deprivation that most people, won't. But as you said, we've created an environment to mitigate that, to give you resources when you need some extra help. But even, and this would be interesting to get your take on that, another layer to the 2472 for me is also a fitness standard, a punitive fitness standard that, ocean lifeguards have, that special forces soldiers have, and everyone else outside looks at us and police and they're like, why do you not have fitness standards? And I've always said in Florida specifically, when I went to Florida, the Mid-Florida Tech in Orlando, it was labeled minimum standards, meaning this is as shit as you should ever be in your career, James Gearing. And the bar was high. The bar was, combat challenges and
Right.
a lot of strenuous work. And I think that is done a huge disservice to our profession when it comes to the heart disease and the strokes and, some of the other things that are attached to, obesity and the inability to deal with some of the mental stuff as well. So what is your take on, the need for an actual real, held accountable fitness standard in the fire service?
Well, I think it needs to be as we do it in the IAFF, the way we promote it is a wellness and fitness initiative that's non-punitive. And so, yes, we bring firefighters on and we want them in the best possible physical and mental shape that they can be when we hire them in their 20s, let's say. But we have to keep that going. So we have to teach them basically how to cook. We have to teach them how to eat. I mean, they need to know what proper nutrition is to be fit. And they need to have fitness programs. They need to be given time to work out. They need to make it where it's exciting, it's inviting, it's part of the routine. It's not punitive. We can't take somebody and wait 5 or 6 or 10 years and go, well, you're 50 pounds overweight, so we're taking you off the rig. Well, that's punitive. That's going to be extremely negative. And that's what traditionally has happened in the past, is that these so-called mandatory physical fitness programs have all been geared at the people who just have not been taken care of over their career. So we got to start you out from the very beginning. I believe part of rookie school ought to be exactly that, teaching you how to cook and eat. If you don't know how to cook and eat, you're not going to be in shape for your career. And then talk about, fitness and make that available to them, along with annual physicals and making sure they have all of their screening, their blood tests, continuing that along their whole journey, I think will, change the fire service. Of course, you're going to have some one-offs here or there that aren't going to comply or aren't going to, participate. And we've got to deal with those on a one-on-one basis. But I think for the majority, it's going to work.
Someone said to me, in a good culture, you don't need fitness standards. And I saw that in Anaheim, for example. I mean, pretty much everyone I can think of was in good shape. We played sports together. We worked out together. It was just cultural. And that, forms a very cohesive crew as well. When you sweating together and,
Right.
play a game of over the line or whatever it is, and you're laughing about so-and-so falling flat on their face. I mean, there's so many upsides to that. And I agree completely. When I say punitively, if someone introduced it now, of course, there's an on-ramp of a couple of years because there will be people that are deconditioned. But holding people to a standard, and that actually, if you are not at that standard, then you need to be taken out operationally because you are a danger to yourself, your crew, and the people that you're serving. It then filters out the chaff, like you said, because there are people on departments that have no intention of getting in shape. And that's, completely, unacceptable. With people's children died because so-and-so tapped out 3 floors up. And if you look at, for example, ocean lifeguard or lifeguarding, I did the open water stuff, every year or 2 years, you have to requal. You have to do,
Right.
whatever hundreds, yard swim and tows and go retrieve the dummy from the bottom. And I think we have that. I think the CPAT or the FPAT, the the Firestead version are very fair. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what gender you are. You just go through these motions. And if you can do that in a normal time, great, you're good for another year. But by disregarding it, we have created a workforce that isn't able to do the job. Let's be honest. Like next to my last fire station, there was a 30-story hotel. The elevators go out. That's 100 pounds of gear, 30 floors up before you even start working. So, right. Where's that line between, of course, not expecting someone to do like Olympic level physical stuff, but also maintaining someone's ability. And the front door is absolutely ideal. But I feel like if there aren't repercussions for you not meeting the bar, then some of those people will just shrug their shoulders and be like, all right, I'm not doing it. And then what do you do with them?
It's got to be integrated into the department culture. It's got to be integrated from day one for everybody. And it's got to be from the top down. It can't just be, people in operations. I firmly believe and have always worked for chiefs that believed in that and participated in the fitness standards, because, our command staff have to set the example, as the leaders, but it's got to be in a department that hasn't done anything. What do? You got to ramp it up. You got to slowly ramp it up and work with people, and those people that, aren't in the best of shape or whatever, we got to get them on a remediation plan. And that's our, way of doing it that I believe works the best. And then, after, I don't know how much time you give them, but after a reasonable amount of time, there's, you deal with it, on a one-on-one basis. But I think that we can't just come into a department that hasn't done anything for a century and then just say, okay, because that's what they used to do to us. Okay, you're going to work out every day at 4:00. We don't care what you do, but you're going to do it at 4:00. It's like that didn't make any sense. We need some guidance. We need some direction. We have peer fitness counselors. We have a very good program of training, peer fitness counselors, embedding those into departments. I mean, the departments that are very progressive have exercise physiologists on board. They go around, they motivate people to exercise, and, they talk about their health, their wellness, their, eating habits. I mean, my son is, just recently gone through the fire academy, and he's in paramedic school now, and he's out riding and tells me, about all the wonderful meals they're cooking. But I can see, how much healthier they are than, when I was in the fire station every day. Much different mindset. And I'm really happy to see that. But it's starts from the bottom up, right? And then the leaders have to lead on that. But I do think we can integrate that into the service, absolutely. And I think there are ways to do that, and definitely support that.
Well, I think now is the perfect time for this conversation, because I've said, let's take Marion County, where I live, mandatory overtime every 2 weeks. So every second week, a lot of those men and women are doing 80-hour work weeks. So then you come in and go, and I need you to maintain a fitness standard. Like, okay, well, we haven't created an environment for you to perform at a high level, and now we're going to drop that on you. So I think that kind of coupled with the 24/72, all right, we're bringing in this progressive, healthy work week now where you get ample rest and recovery. We're also going to layer in a fitness standard so we can double down on not only your performance, which is extremely important, but also your longevity, your health, your mental health, etc. So I think this is the kind of the open door for this to come in as well. Because this young generation, I've heard a lot of people, of your generation tell me, James, a lot of these young recruits that are in shape, they're really in shape. That mentally they're prepared. There's a lot of incredible candidates out there that we got to tap into. So now we get to challenge them. Now we get to raise the bar and be like, all right, let's focus on performance. When we have fitness trainers, we talk about, well, let's try and stop you getting hurt as much. When we have, mental health counselors, they say, well, let's try and get you to stop killing yourself as much. Well, if you look at other areas, sports, special operations, those professionals are trying to forge performance out of these people. And the beautiful side effect is you get hurt less, you struggle mentally less. So I think there's a beautiful opportunity to really lean into what we call the tactical athlete, that a firefighter should be able to throw on 100 pounds and climb 30 flights of stairs and then go to work, because we've chosen the top tier of our community. We've addressed the recruitment and retention problem. We've got lists that are super deep again. We're taking that top tier and we're challenging them. And I saw that in Hialeah when I was there. We were put through the ringer in my very first fire academy. And I think that is a beautiful opportunity to bring in the fitness standards, but not look at it as like you're being punished, but it's the opposite. Like, we want you to operate at a high level, no different than a Navy SEAL or an SAS operator.
Well, you bring up two interesting points. One is I don't disagree with creating that fitness standard and, bringing in that fitness and wellness piece into the department. But it's got to start with an annual physical. And a lot of departments want to push you got to work out, you got to be in shape, you got to be fit. but they don't want to invest in an annual physical or a cancer screening. And a lot of times there are underlying issues there that the firefighter may not be aware of. And we can identify those with an annual physical. And when you look at the cost of the physical versus the investment you've made in the individual, that is a very small investment to do every year to catch those underlying conditions that may be causing some of these, fitness, wellness issues, and addressing them quickly. The other piece you mentioned, the tactical athlete, I completely agree with that. And that's our broken workers' compensation system in Florida that is contributing to that problem. We have companies out there that are providing a tremendous service to firefighters. We're just having a hard time breaking through the workers' comp environment to get them involved. There's companies out there that have been dealing with professional athletes and sporting teams for a long time. I mean, give you an example. What happens to a professional baseball player who's a pitcher and he gets hurt? Well, that day or the next day, that baseball player is getting what? They're getting evaluated by an orthopedic. They're getting an MRI. I mean, for a firefighter who is an athlete, let's say, that's not happening. They're sending us to an urgent care center because it's cheaper. They're telling you to go do physical training, do PT for 6 or 8 weeks, and then, take these medications, take some OxyContins. We get a lot of firefighters that get addicted to the wrong medications because of the type of poor treatment they're getting for on-the-job injuries. That's got to change. So if you want to change the fire service, there's a lot involved in that, and it goes down to those on-the-job injuries that I don't believe the employers are doing us justice on. Now, there are some that are doing a really good job, but for the most part, our system is pretty broken and needs some work.
I experienced that. So I'll give credit. The last place I worked was Reedy Creek before I kind of stepped out the fire service to put pressure on from the outside. But I had hurt my back, and it was a Murphy's Law. It always happens. It's not the, courageous save, dragging someone out of a window. It was picking up a hypervent patient on a stretcher and arch my back, and then boom. And so I'm sent to urgent care. And the initial consultation was like, I just hurt it. Obviously, it could be hopefully just a twinge, or it could be something worse. Now, I felt like it was a lot worse. I don't think I'm a giant pussy, but I was just going to wait and give it some time. So I went back, whatever it was, 3 days later, because they said, well, look, we can't do anything yet. It's inflamed. Let it settle down for a few days. And it was a PA who, and again, I say this just to describe the kind of irony of the situation. He must have been, I'm not exaggerating, 350, 400 pounds, exhausted by the time he even walked down to the room to evaluate me. And I said, hey, this is 3 days now. This is a musculoskeletal injury. I want to get an MRI so I can look at it, so I can start heading down the PT route. And he said, no. He said, you will take painkillers and anti-inflammatories. And I'm like, and excuse me? So anyway, I ended up just taking the prescription and then calling the clinic and said, no, I need a second opinion. I want to see the original guy. And then he actually got me into PT, got me an MRI, but that's because I had a background in sports science and training and being an athlete, and I understood that I had to fight for this thing. So, and then it turns out that I ripped 3 ligaments in my back, did PT, did the thing called foundation training, paid out of pocket to go to chiro, never had surgery, never took, the drugs. I didn't take the drugs at that time, and rehab back to full duty, and was able to deadlift in a firefighter competition about two months after going back to work. So the point being is that could have gone a very different way. Like you said, an opioid addiction or rods or, fusions in my back. And I've got friends that have done that. They never went back to work. And some of them, one of them walks with a cane now. So right. You're absolutely right. They do a disservice. And if you look at the Green Berets Thor 3 program, they have prehab, they have rehab. I mean, they are working to get that soldier back into the field, with their ruck, in their boots. So we
Correct.
are so far from the same kind of thing that an athlete or a special forces soldier would experience after they had an injury.
Yeah, and there's companies out there right now that are providing that kind of service, and we just have a lot of departments that are resisting that. And it's actually a service that pays for itself, because if I can go see, a regular physician and an orthopedic surgeon or somebody along those lines, depending on what the injury is, and get the MRI, the CT scan, the X-ray, whatever, done quickly, I can get my appropriate treatment done quicker. I can get back to work faster, and they're paying less overtime, because what is the employer doing the whole time I'm out? They're replacing me with somebody else on overtime usually. So yeah, we have to fix that system. We have to start treating the firefighters like they are $1 million athletes, just like football, baseball players, that they need to be back on the field, because they don't let grass grow under their feet. They're paying them a lot of money to produce. So they're going to get them back and healthy as quickly as they can to get them on the field. And that's exactly what we need to do with the fire service.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of, fighting for this profession, talk to me about what made you even join the local union, and then kind of walk me through where you are now, in your position.
Well, that's an interesting story. So I was a charter member of our local back. Like I told you, we had all these fire districts, and we saw that the county was starting to talk about creating a county fire department. And so we decided to organize an IAFF local back in 1979. And all of the fire districts got together. All of the career firefighters that worked for these 14 different fire districts sat down, and we formed our own local. And then we started to negotiate a contract. And it wasn't shortly thereafter that the county merged all the fire districts together in 1980, and basically said, we're going to do away with all these fire districts, and we're just going to have one county fire department. And so I got involved very early on. And what ended up happening to me was I had let's just say, to be kind, a very difficult fire chief. And I was a young, maybe difficult firefighter. And I was told that I was not adhering to the grooming policy. And so I asked for a copy of the grooming policy. Well, they didn't have one. They just said they made it up. So I did not adhere to the grooming policy. I grew some facial hair, which they said was unacceptable. I still was able to maintain a seal on my mask. I was able to do my job effectively. But the higher ups just didn't like it, so they terminated me. And the local came in and represented me. And within a couple of weeks' time, they were able to get me my job back, get me fully reinstated, and negotiated a new grooming policy for the department, so that the rule was in writing and everybody knew what the standard was going to be. And that kind of set me on my journey to become more and more involved in the labor movement, that we needed to have a finite set of rules. We needed to know what the rules are, and we needed to have a say in them. We needed to have a voice at the table. And like I told you earlier, I mean, we were not getting the proper tools and equipment that we needed. A lot of our members were investing their own money to buy their own gloves, to buy their own boots, to buy their own bunker pants, their own hoods. And so those were the kind of things that we were fighting for in our first collective bargaining agreement. And then it wasn't soon thereafter, I would say in the mid to late 80s, that we started talking about our work schedule, because we were working 56 hours a week. And a lot of departments were working 48 hours a week. And Boca Raton was working 42 hours a week. And so we pushed to go to a 48-hour work schedule. And so we did that over a 3-year period. We incrementally reduced our work week from 56 to 48. Part of that was that they weren't paying us correctly. So we ended up having to file a lawsuit against the employer under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And that also, helped to resolve some of the overtime work schedule issues and get us to an appropriate 48-hour work week, appropriate at the time, And so I got involved, and then in 1990, I got elected as the president of the local, and I took on a merger of EMS and fire. So at the time, EMS was a separate entity from fire. It was a countywide EMS service and a countywide fire service. And we started talking about the need to integrate, cross-train, dual role, firefighter, paramedic, take over EMS transport, and make the service more efficient. And amazingly enough, it was a battle with our management who was against it. And it was a matter of educating them and, pushing that together. So we merged our fire and EMS unions together, and then pushed to merge the fire department together, and eventually cross-trained everybody as a firefighter paramedic. It took quite a bit of doing, but, we got there. I mean, I think there was some pushback on both sides. Some paramedics didn't want to be firefighters. Some firefighters didn't want to be paramedics. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that over your career in the service. They want to be in one particular silo or the other. And we had to convince them that the most efficient and effective service is to have cross-trained dual role firefighter paramedics. And so we only had a handful, I would say, that we respected their wishes. And that's what I think made it so successful, was that if you want to finish your career as a paramedic or you want to finish your career as a firefighter, we're okay with that, because 95% of our workforce was going to voluntarily cross-train as firefighters and paramedics and make the system work. And then we just told those members that didn't want to cross-train and wanted to finish their careers out in their particular role, that they just would not have any avenue of promotion. They would just be segregated to being a firefighter on a fire truck or being a paramedic on an EMS unit. And eventually they were all phased out and being able to retire at their own discretion. So that worked out really well. And I ended up serving as president of the Broward County Firefighters and Paramedics for 27 years, and continued to advance their pay and benefits and, health and safety. Very proud of the fact that we were able to bring in mandatory physicals for everybody. And while today we kind of take that for granted, I could tell you there was a lot of pushback from the members who did not want to have mandatory physicals, because they were very concerned that somebody might find something, some underlying medical condition that would end their career. And so trying to convince members that medical exams were a good thing for them, that they should know what's going on in their body if they're not doing it themselves already on a regular basis. Doing it where the department's going to manage it and pay for it is a good thing. Was a huge undertaking, but we were able to successfully push that through. And since then, we've been able to identify dozens and dozens of underlying medical conditions, particularly identifying cancers that firefighters were able to catch early and identify and treat.
With the annual physical, recently I've had guests that are doing really incredible comprehensive blood work. I just had an MRI, preventative scan company, which I love that idea as well. And you couple those together with, yeah, exactly. And then throw in the ultrasound, because some of the organs you see better with the ultrasound. And then now, like you said, you've got a baseline at the front door with your new recruit. And then every year or 2 years, whatever it is, now you're able to say, okay, well, this blood vessel seems to be bulging a little bit compared to last time. And now you can catch an aneurysm, you can catch a tumor, I mean, so many of these issues, the
Right.
congestion in the heart, whatever it is, preventatively. And so back to the workman's comp, that's also a lot cheaper than, a cardiac bypass or, months of chemo that this person's got to go through now. So for the individual, it means that we can get back to work, full stop. And then for the department, that investment obviously is going to save money hand over fist when you're not paying for the worst case scenario surgeries.
Which is why we see a lot of fire unions taking over the healthcare in the fire service. I'm a big proponent of having a firefighter union-run health trust to manage our healthcare, and we have a lot of them in Florida. We have over 30 of them around the state that are doing some amazing things for firefighters' health and safety. Being able to take over and manage the healthcare has just been a huge advancement in our health and safety in the fire service. And if you look around and see which departments are doing it, which departments are advancing, I think you'll be very impressed in what you see out there. Palm Beach County probably being a big example of what they've been able to do over the years with their health and wellness clinic.
Well, Palm Beach County is about to go to actually be 24/72, I believe, January of next year, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And one of the things that's been interesting, I'd love you to educate me on this, is I don't know if you've ever seen that picture of the horse and it's tied off to a plastic chair. And it's kind of the irony of, your false imprisonment, if you like. And the one thing that I've heard from a lot of departments is like, yeah, but what about FLSA? Now, all the departments that I've seen have basically said, what about FLSA? We're just going to change regardless. Now, this is something I think that needs to be addressed on that side as well. But a lot of them have just come away and said, look, if we go down to a 42-hour work week and the hourly rate goes up, that pretty much absorbs the faux overtime that we were told we were getting initially. But there's some interesting backstory of how that even came about in our profession. And then I'd love to hear what the future is to try and remove that from the fire service, as it doesn't apply to us the same as most civilians.
Yeah. So under the FLSA, the threshold is 53 hours a week, but that can be extended out to a 28-day period. So unless you are working a 56-hour work week, if you're working below a 53-hour work week, so if you're on a Kelly Day schedule, you could be working a 52, a 50, or a 48-hour work week. FLSA really does not come into play. It's not really a factor for you. If you're on a 56-hour work week, what most employers do is they put you on a 28-day pay cycle. So if you work in excess of 212 hours in a 28-day period, then any hours over the 212 are considered time and a half. So you have to be at that higher end, to be able to be impacted by it. But you use Palm Beach County, for example, they're on a 48-hour work week right now. So there is no FLSA per se impact, and a lot of that is negotiable as well. Some departments count all hours worked as hours worked. Some only count certain time off as hours worked. It's all negotiable. So every particular situation is different. If you just take the FLSA in its pure sense, they consider sweat time as hours worked. Any time you take off is not considered hours worked, but that has been changed in a lot of departments. So if you take a vacation, that's considered the same as hours worked. It doesn't affect your overtime.
So with that being used as a barrier to departments going to the 24/72, the 42-hour work week, what would you say to the people that was the big hurdle that they were holding in front of you and saying, well, but what about this?
I think it's a false narrative. I think if you spin it out and say, okay, this firefighter's making I don't know, $50,000 a year, and then you reverse that back and look at what that hourly is, and you look at what, if any, additional overtime they're making is, um, you can calculate that into a new hourly rate at a 42-hour work week or a 48-hour work, whatever work week you want to put them on, you can recalculate that so that the firefighter does not lose, any annual income. And then other shifts, let's say, of overtime over the 42-hour work week, of course, would be time and a half. They would be entitled to that time and a half. So I think it's a false narrative that's being spread out there. I think it can be easily overcome. Some people are just so accustomed to it that it's, striking fear into them where there shouldn't be. We should just sit down and look at the numbers. I remember listening to one of your lectures, which I use something you said, which is you compared the number of 8-hour days that a 40-hour person works to the number of 8-hour days that a 56-hour firefighter works. And you work almost every single day of the year if you calculate it that way. And I use that argument quite a bit. And when you do it that way, people start to get a light bulb come on and go, oh, I didn't really, understand that or see it that way. I thought that was a great analogy you made.
It was literally a few weeks before that presentation, because I've talked about, we say 1 day on, 2 days off, and again, a 24-hour work week is a work shift is 3 8-hour days crushed together. So it's 3 days on, 1 day off. So it's not 10 days a month; it's 30 days a month. And I crunched the numbers one day, and it was 364 days a year that we work.
Right.
So it does reframe this great schedule when you put it in those terms.
Yeah, but let's even not say I work 1 on and 2 off, because that's, false in a lot of cases, right? If I'm at a busy house somewhere or I'm on an EMS unit, I'm working 24 hours. I'm not 1 day. I mean, to me, in a firefighter world, to you, it's 1 day. But if I'm having to run a dozen calls, 15 calls in a 24-hour period, that can be extremely exhausting, because if I'm on an EMS unit, rarely is a call going to be under an hour in length. By the time I get to the call, I assess and treat the patient. And if I have to transport them to the hospital and then get my unit back in service, I'm at least committing a minimum of an hour to that. And then what happens is when I get off of my 24-hour shift, I'm in a relaxed recovery mode. I'm not ready to go out and just do something else. I got to take that next day to recover. So it's really like, yes, I was on for 24 hours. Now I'm recovering for 24 hours. Now I have 1 day to kind of do something or relax before I got to go back and start all over again. So it's more like a 48-24, not a 24-48. That's the kind of way I like to look at it and describe it to people, because they don't actually realize that you could be up all night long. And as you well know, having been in the service, a lot of our calls come after hours, not necessarily during the daylight hours.
Absolutely. Well, the other thing as well is, if you just take the calendar days, the last third of your shift was from midnight to 8 a.m. or 7:30 whenever you have shift change. So that is a work day for most people, 8 hours with a 1 hour lunch. So that wasn't a day off, because you worked 8 hours. You came in on Monday, and then from midnight on Tuesday to 8 a.m. on Tuesday, you were still working. And like you said, most likely running calls. So that was not a day off on paper. So you only have that third day. And as a lot of us say, it's hard to relax on that third day, even because you know that you're prepping. You go in the store, you're buying enough food for a shift or 2 shifts if you know you're on the bubble for mandatory. You're washing all your gear. You're obviously still doing all the husband and parent duties as well, trying to attend,
Right.
school graduations and what else you got going on. And it's not a sub story. It's just debunking. Again, we talked about myths earlier, the myth that we told ourselves and our neighbors and our friends that we have this amazing schedule. And we don't. But the 2472 is getting us closer to that. We don't need to barely work. We want to work. We just want the rest and recovery so that when we go back for the next shift, of which it's fully staffed, so we're not going to get told we can't go home, that we can really be excited about those 24 hours with our crew.
You know what I find fascinating is that from the inception of the union back in 1918, when the International Association of Firefighters was first formed, all of the firefighters that formed our union met in Washington, D.C. And do you know what the topic of discussion was? Work schedule. That was the main reason why firefighters got together to form a union, was because they were working 7 days a week. They had no days off. And they wanted to get together and organize and start talking about, how do we reduce our work week? How do we start having a more normal life? And eventually they only went to a 24-24. They went one on, one off, one on, one off. And then there were all the other variations of it. But I find that fascinating that here we are, over 100 years later, still talking about work schedules, when this seems like it should be pretty simple.
Well, what irks me with the air quotes old guys that are in now, which is basically my generation, they're my age, is, well, I worked, 20 years or 25 years or whatever it was. So, why should we change? It's like, but you work 24/48 because someone else ahead of you fought for that schedule. But you're saying you just want to take, you don't want to give to the next generation. And this is what I love, is a lot of people that come on the show, whether they're still in or whether they've left, yourself, people that aren't wearing the actual badge on their chest anymore are like, no, I live that, and I don't think it's right. Like you said, when EMS and fire combined, it changed the dynamic completely. That's an environment that I knew at the front door that, I was coming into, which makes me laugh when younger firefighters say they just want to do the fire. It's like, okay, well then you're in the wrong job, mate, because this is EMS as well. It's welcome to America. Right. And you should be excited about that. You get to pull them out the fire and then save their life, not just leave them steaming on the front lawn. But yeah, so I think this is exactly that. If you have selfless service running through your heart, it doesn't matter whether you benefit from it. It's about doing what's right and fixing it for the next generation, just like the people who fought for the SCBAs, the people who fought for defibrillators and the jaws of life and all the other things that we got to experience and use in our career. And then one of those was the 24/48. Well, now it's our turn. I'm not going to invent a new Halligan. So the only thing that I can do is try and make a dent on the wellness and performance of the young firefighter.
Well, I got to give credit to our governor for passing our health and safety legislation that included the recommendation of the 42-hour work week, because I think that really helped to ignite a spark in the fire service as well. I know that it scared a lot of fire chiefs. I know that they lobbied heavily against it, which totally befuddles me why they would be against something like that. I get it if you're a city manager, elected official, HR, something like that, the bean counters, the budget people, but not the fire chief. They allegedly came from where we were, so they should be supporting that. So that was really good to see. And I think that has ignited a spark in our state that has really taken off. And I'm really happy to see that, all over. I mean, Pasco County really, set the bar high. And that was a really proud moment for me, because I was able to, help organize them and negotiate their very first contract, which looks far different than the one they have today, which I'm so proud of, where they've gone.
That's who I send everyone to, is Dixon and those guys, because they are, to me, the blueprint of how to do it right. They fostered relationships between all the different groups that are needed. They really analyzed, okay, let me reverse engineer where we want to be, where we are now. I think they were a 6-week Kelly to, they took 2 years when they had 2.5. That was how successful it was. And what I really love, and I'll give a nod to St. Johns County, even though from what I understand, their chief is still opposing it, but the union did the same thing. They fought tooth and nail. They put presentations. They invited neighboring departments. It was incredible. So there are some really fantastic groups out there doing the right thing. But to your point, there are some people behind the scenes that have opposed it. And a local chief who's just coincidentally stepped down, announced his retirement right when Marion said they're going to 24/72, I know was one of them. Another one locally to me as well. And I know they didn't speak for every fire chief in Florida, but to have this initiative after you're in this retention, recruitment, suicide, addiction, all these different crises that we're in, and to oppose an initiative that also will save you money, absolutely will save you money. It'll take an investment up front and then save you money for the length of the time that you've got a department. And you will oppose that behind the scenes. Send a little private email that someone forwarded to me, and I let the world know about it. But that shows you that this is also an opportunity to look back now and go, okay, who was against this? Who was fighting for us? And who was fighting against us? And that is also an opportunity then to address some of the toxic leadership that we see that is also behind some of the suicides. Some of these cancerous departments are absolutely contributing to some of our men and women taking their own lives.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I told you earlier, I get too many of those calls from, people that are experiencing a mental health crisis, and then eventually sometimes it turns into suicide, and it does relate to the working environment that they're in and how they're treated. And we got to change that. We really do. I mean, a lot of departments are, hats off to the departments that are providing the really good mental health resources for their members and educating them, because that's important. But the time off is another piece of that, right? However we can accomplish that. I know not everybody is going to embrace a 24/72 schedule. So we have a couple of departments that have reduced their work schedule down to 42 hours a week, just doing a little differently. I think that's great too, as long as they can reduce the amount of time that they're exposing themselves to this career. They're going to be healthier, in the long run, and have a much better outcome at the end when they go to retire.
People asked me when we were at that convention together, the FPF, they told me about this other schedule. And, I really didn't know anything about it then. And I've seen a couple of other ones. Well, what about the 48, 144 and all this stuff? My only response to that is when you have A, B, C, D, you're fully staffed, you're not relying on overtime. So there's not a time and a half component into filling any of these spots. Secondly, we know from all the science out there, including a Swedish study that was done specifically on a 24/72, that it takes about 72 hours to recover from a 24-hour shift. So when you start breaking that cycle, what you're really saying is I care more about my block of time off than I do my ability to deliver service to the public and to be a good firefighter and a good paramedic. So that's my only pushback, is when we know now that the 24/72 from a staffing point of view is extremely easy, ABCD, I mean, it can't get any easier than that, but also from rest, recovery, performance, reduction in everything from pushing the wrong med to crashing into someone at an intersection. That is the gold standard. If people are trying to decide which one, to me, that needs to be the one that's presented as the best. And if you have some bizarre reason why that isn't the right fit, okay, well then second best, I guess, is good. But the reality is a 24/72 is the only one that gives you the ample rest and recovery from every single shift. And if you do need to have, a time where you need more people and you have to have an overtime, well, if we're on A shift, then you work C shift. So you still went home and got one night's sleep before you went back and did that second 24. So you never do a 48.
Yeah, sometimes I think you have to compromise, whether it's educating the elected officials you have to deal with or educating your own membership, as we talked about earlier. So I think my goal is the overall reduction in the amount of time you spend, in the career. So if we can do that, I don't disagree with you that the, 4-shift schedule is definitely going to be better all the way around. But if there's another way to skin that cat and we can get there, let's, analyze that. Let's look at it. One of the good things that I've been talking to the University of Miami about recently is they are engaging a study in Palm Beach over the effects of transitioning to a 24 72 hour schedule from a 24 48 hour schedule. So it's going to be very interesting to see. They want to measure all of the metrics. So they're going to take approximately 200 firefighters from that department and monitor them all the way through their journey and do regular testing on them and have them wear wearables where they can monitor all their vitals, take their blood, do physical exams on them, do mental health questionnaires on them. And they're also going to go out and start interviewing their family members to see how this change in a work schedule is not just affecting me as a firefighter, but how is it affecting the people around me, my family? So I think it's going to be a tremendous benefit to the fire service once we get that done.
Yeah, no, I think we all know what the results will be, but to have that annotated on paper to show, this is the benefit, I think it's going to be amazing. And then obviously that will be, especially the late adopters, that will be the final piece, I think, for them to follow suit. We talked about this the other day, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I think it does need to be said. And I know Dixon is actually helping after, I'll give a credit to Jim Bernica, suggested this, putting what's happening in Florida in front of the IAFF, the national, to get them to take a stance on it. Because what's been very frustrating to me, I know there was a change of leadership a few years ago, but now as we stand, our current president is from Boston, who works a 42-hour work week. The IAFF headquarters is in DC, who works a 42-hour work week. A lot of the Northeast, work a similar shift. And there hasn't been a stance or a call for that to be, a nationwide standard, a profession standard, just like trucking and aviation and all these other, professions have. So what is your take on that? And is this something that you hope that you will see? I know it's going to be put in front of them in August in that convention, but I would love to see, because it's a zero cost thing, to have this, have the national organization actually take a stance and advocate for some of these states that are finding it a lot harder than we are at Florida at the moment.
So it's a delicate balance between staffing and the safety of our firefighters and, pushing for this work schedule. So as you noted, up in the Northeast, they don't think anything about it because the majority of the Northeast has been on a 40 or 42-hour work schedule for as long as they can remember. So that's just like foreign to them that somebody would work a different work schedule. The same with staffing. So our big push right now is 4-person staffing on all apparatus to be able to meet the NFPA standards, because while reducing your work schedule is hugely important to our, physical and mental health and our rest and recovery, the same applies if I'm riding a 2-person engine company or a 3-person engine company versus a 4-person engine company or a 5-person ladder company. I mean, those can all create immense stresses on us. And so we have made it a priority to push for 4-person staffing on all rigs. As far as the work schedule goes, I've been a huge advocate of reducing the work schedule for quite a long time at the IAFF. Ever since I've been an IAFF district vice president, I've been involved in technical assistance and organizing. And I've gotten our staff to create custom reports for departments. So we are pushing out a lot of custom reporting for any department that wants to see what is it going to take, because that's the big fear, right? Somebody comes in and says, I want to reduce my work week. And the chief goes, oh, I can't afford to hire 50 people. And they just pull the number out of their rear end. They don't know what number of people they really need to hire. So We've created in our technical assistance department the ability to produce professional reports for them to go through the staffing and analysis to show them, well, you don't need to hire 50 people. You probably only need to hire 20 or 25. You've already got all of these additional people, filling in on these Kelly days or vacations or whatever. And so I completely agree that should be one of our priorities. I wholeheartedly support that and will advocate for it.
What's interesting is locally in Marion County, I had one of my firefighter friends from there say to me, well, this was a while ago because what happened very recently was a 180 that was literally about 3 weeks ago. But he was saying, oh, we want to go to 4-man staffing. And I said to him, well, look, you can't even staff 3 people on the rigs at the moment. You're bleeding people. So even though that as a goal is amazing, and I was never on a 2-man rig, but I was on a 3-person rig in Orange County for a long time and had fires where I was the donkey humping, 2.5 and Ys and bundles and ladders, while the LT was on the radio and the engineer was at the pump. And it was, Murphy's Law, long trek down to the house, and the train had stopped everyone else from coming in. So I totally get it. But for when we have a national, retention problem, as you said, stopping the bleeding will allow us to then find the extra qualified people to fill that 4th seat. So I think that those two go hand in hand. And if we want to upstaff, then we have to address the work week as well. That then keeps people in departments that already work there, that attracts young people. Because this is something that people miss. Gen Z are leaning into the trades. They are going into welding and plumbing and construction because they look at university and go, well, why would I spend all that money or a piece of paper that I can't get a job with? So they're smart, but they're not coming into our trade yet. So there's a massive untapped resource. And I think if we address what is broken, as you said, all the things that we've discussed today, including the work week, you will then have this higher demand that you can then say, all right, well, now we're going to put the extra person on the rig. If we're talking about well-being and performance and delivery of service, we need 4 people on an engine. We need 5 people on a truck.
Yeah, absolutely. We need that. We need those to go hand in hand because the big fear is I'm going to reduce my work week and they're going to reduce my staffing. And now I'm going to be running with 3 on a rig or 2 on a rig, and they're not going to fill overtime spots. So that's a big fear of a lot of our leadership and a lot of our members. And we have to eliminate that concern and say, no, we can do both. We can increase our staffing and make it safer, and we can reduce our work week and make it healthier for us.
What about reciprocity? I actually was lucky when I worked in the West Coast. They just didn't care. They were like, right, we will take because it wasn't even a lateral hiring, but we will take applicants from other states. And I literally other side of the country flew to Anaheim like 2 or 3 times to test and do writtens and do the interviews. And they took it then. But then, when you look at some of the stringent restraints that you have in states like ours, it's very hard for, someone from another state, of which we have 49 to tap into, that, come here because their partner has become a nurse and they're now working at, Shands or whatever it is. And I think we're missing a lot of firefighters from just the inability to go to a different state. What is your stance on reciprocity? Because when you look at what we do, most of the country does the same thing. And it doesn't mean that you can't have a stringent orientation to make sure they meet your level and a probation to make sure they're the right person for your department. But to tell someone in Wisconsin, well, you don't understand how to throw a 24 like I do or how to pull a cross lay, it seems a little ridiculous when you take a step back, whereas a paramedic can challenge in any state.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think to your point, we need to have, a more common, let's say, training standard, because I understand when the fire chiefs were pushing this reciprocity a year or 2 ago, they wanted to accept anybody's certification from anywhere in the country. And I came to learn that some states do not have the same standard that we have in firefighting. They don't provide the same level of education. Some states, the education was below 100 hours. And, ours is upwards to 500 hours now. And, you pretty much got to be an EMT before they'll even admit you to the fire academy anymore. And so standards, I think, are very important. Firefighters can come to Florida and challenge the test. I know a lot that have. So I still have a concern. If they meet the standard, then, like you said, is there a way to orientate them? Is there a different class that they can take, some sort of an orientation? there should be some middle ground there where we can do that if we have a problem. But I'll go back to what I told you earlier. I don't know that we have a problem recruiting firefighters from out of state. We have a lot of, well-trained, valuable and available firefighters in the state of Florida, but they all gravitate to the places with great pay and benefits. They don't go to the places that don't have very good pay and benefits. They don't want to go and apply to the department that runs a 2-person engine company, doesn't have a defined benefit pension plan, and works a 56-hour work week and works a 48.96. They're not applying there. They're applying to Pasco County. They're applying to Boca Raton. They're going to apply to Marion County. These are the places they're going to go to that are recognizing, the value of the employee. And then, as you said, the Gen Zers are going into the trades, which I think is great. I've said that for a long time. So we are promoting a firefighter journeyman apprentice program at the IAFF. We're working with the Department of Labor right now on that program, and we have a number of departments that are beginning to implement that. I think if we implemented a national journeyman firefighter program similar to what some of the trades do, I think that would alleviate any concern anybody has on reciprocity. We're just not quite there yet.
I love that, because that's the journey I had. I stayed as a firefighter medic, and I loved that position, and early on in my career, I thought I'd be at a 10-10-5, 10 as a fireman, 10 as a captain. This would have been California talk, and then 5 as a BC. But I got to 10 years. I'm not ready to promote yet. I still love what I'm doing. And then I became a medic, and that was all new as well. So the senior man, that journey as well, whether you develop someone who promotes or whether you develop someone who just becomes really good at being a firefighter, I think that's what we're missing. There's a lot of jumping ranks prematurely because of benefits or pay or whatever it is. And some people it's out of necessity, and I understand it. But there's a lot of people out there that just never spent enough time in the back seat, in the jump seat, really learning that craft before they then promoted to drive or to command a scene. So I really love that concept, and I think it is missing in the fire service, especially these days.
Yeah, we actually had it. If you didn't know, we had it back in the 70s.
Oh, really?
And so that program was eliminated, I'd say in early 80s. The firefighter apprentice journeyman program was eliminated, and so now we're bringing it back, and I think that's going to be great for the fire service, and I think it will alleviate this reciprocity issue, so that if we have this national standard for firefighter journeyman apprentice, it doesn't matter if you come from California, Wisconsin, or New York or Florida. I mean, obviously there are differences, and you are going to have to orientate people because there are construction differences. And, while, we can say, pulling a line and fighting a fire is pretty much the same everywhere, it's not the same everywhere. It's not the same in, a wood frame in Wisconsin, 2-story, 3-story versus a CBS block construction or a high-rise building fire. They're all have their own nuances. And so that's all regionally specific that we have to educate our firefighters on when they come to work here.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, you'd have that even, within a department. You might be downtown, Fort Lauderdale, right, and it's high rises, everything you do. You might be in the area where there, 1920s wood frame homes and, lots of crack pipes and candles. So, we all have our nuances that we have to learn when we get there.
Yeah.
I want to hit one more area that I want to even just kind of get you to reflect back on some calls that were notable. But just before we do, your county is very unique because as of now, I know there's conversations of changing this. You actually are under the sheriff's office. So talk to me about that dynamic and give me some of the pros and the cons, because it's alien to most of us.
Yeah, so I was the union president back in early 2000 when we started having the discussion. And we had discussions with the county commission, who had a different vision at the time. And we had a very visionary sheriff who said that, look, I'm an elected official, And if we transfer the fire department under the sheriff, I already control all of the communications, 911. It would just make sense to put that all under one umbrella. And we sat down and had those very intense discussions. It was extremely difficult because telling a firefighter you're going to work for a cop was very foreign to them, to say your boss is going to be a sheriff. But in reality, the boss wasn't a sheriff per se. He was an elected official that was, running and managing a public safety entity. And the fire chief, we made sure that the fire chief reported directly to the sheriff. That was one of our main sticking points. We said, look, we've got to be like on equal footing. We understand they have thousands of sheriffs on the road, deputies, and we only have about 700 on the road under the fire department. But we have a mission. And that mission, has to be able to report to the guy at the top to make those decisions. And so we advocated for that transfer. And I think it was very good at the time. And it led to a lot of cities that began to merge under the county and make the county that much larger, stronger, more effective, and more efficient. I think now the talk with the county is to consider bringing, the fire service back under the county's umbrella. Is more of a budgetary kind of relationship issue that the county commission has with the current sheriff. That wasn't the case back in 2003 when we made that first transfer. One of the county's concerns is that they send a large portion of their tax dollars to the sheriff, but they can't audit those dollars. They don't have any say in how those dollars are spent. And so I believe with all the talk about particularly property tax reform being put on the ballot, the county commissioners have a valid concern that they want to, look at this and study this.
Talk to me about that reform. I've heard obviously a lot of fear in these conversations. The interesting thing for me is, let's say, for example, it goes through. It doesn't change the 2472 conversation, because what you're looking to do is make yourself more fiscally efficient, which that does. You're stopping the wastage of, this revolving door when it comes to recruitment, the mandatory and voluntary overtime, the high workman's comp premiums, the lawsuits, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it stops that conversation, but I mean, I might be completely naive. Obviously, there's going to need to be an investment at the front. But I think if you're being fiscally responsible, that's one of the things that you do regardless of that. But talk to me about that bill, and is it actually endangering our professions? And if so, why is it even being put in the first place?
Well, I don't know why it's being proposed. That was something that was on the governor's agenda to be able to reduce, the property tax burden. I think the bigger burden on people in the state of Florida is homeowners insurance. And I think they kind of missed the boat on attacking, property insurance. Our homeowners insurance is through the roof. And that's got to be addressed at some point. But, on the property tax issue, I think there's a lot of unknowns. We don't really know. I mean, is it going to reduce the amount of revenue if it passed that a city or a county would bring in? Yes, it will. It'll, and there are a lot of projections on that. And originally there was talk about exempting public safety, police and fire. They did eventually exempt schools from that property tax reduction. And I think there's probably going to be a shift in how people are taxed for the service, because people expect those emergency services, whether it's police, fire, EMS, to be there when they need them. And so if a majority of the fire department's budget comes out of the ad valorem tax, they're probably going to start looking at other ways to generate the revenue to pay for that, whether it be a fire fee, or an EMS tax. I know in South Florida, a majority of the departments will have a minimal impact. When I say departments, I'm talking about fire and EMS departments, because they already levy a fire fee that pays for a large majority of the fire department, if not all. So it's going to be just different everywhere. I know that Florida professional firefighters are looking at this right now. It's so new and fresh that there aren't a lot of answers as to how it's going to impact everybody.
Well, I appreciate your perspective because I'm pretty uneducated on the whole thing. I want to just hit one more question, then we'll go to some closing questions. But you have such a long career. I mean, almost 4 decades in uniform, and then obviously beyond in this role that you're in now. When you reflect back, what are some of the career calls? Now, that's not necessarily what's the worst thing you've been on that we hate to be asked. It might be moments of kindness and compassion. But what are some of the calls that really stick out when you reflect back on this long career?
Well, I think there's some fun times, right? You always have a good time, some funny calls. I mean, probably one of the funniest calls I ever was on. I always sticks in my mind. I always tell the story. We were out on a brush fire, and we got a call over the radio that there was a possible woman having a baby. And we looked at the address, and it was like literally around the corner from where we were on the brush fire. So we finished with the brush fire. We went over to this woman's house, and sure enough, she was in the back room getting ready to have a baby, and she wasn't going to make it to the hospital. So we went to work. We guided her through the birth of her child. But during that time, as you can well imagine, if you've ever been in that type of situation, she had a lot of pain, and she made a lot of, she was screaming quite a bit during the birth. But then she would pause and take a little break and rest in between contractions. And we started hearing screaming from behind us again. And we were like, what is this? And then she would have another contraction and start again. And this went on several times until we turned around and figured out there was a parrot in the back of the room. And he was imitating all of her screams during childbirth. Fortunately, she had a beautiful baby boy, and everybody was fine, but it was just such a comical thing. But no, I think some of the best times I had, I worked on our hazardous materials team for quite a long time. And we did a lot of training and preparation, and unfortunately had to respond to a number of overturned gasoline tank trucks in our day. And those were a real experience. Some of our old wood frame homes that we had that went up, those were always something. But the best time of the job is at the firehouse at the kitchen table. It's not necessarily reflecting back on the calls, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. It's that time that we all spent together, at the firehouse with a meal, joking around, doing some training, having to work on Thanksgiving and everybody bringing their family to the fire station and us putting all the tables out into the bays, and then, having 20 or 30 people there for a Thanksgiving dinner. That was some of the best times in the fire service.
It really is the greatest calling. I mean, obviously everyone's got their fit for their professional journey, but I mean, this is why I'm sure you're still doing it. This is why I'm still doing it. It's because it really is the greatest job in the world. And this is what we're trying to preserve, trying to get people to get back to. We've strayed a little bit, everything from, some of the health issues that we talked about to, I love the individual dorms. I think it is absolutely makes sense not to wake up at station, for one rescue to go on a call, but we also have to then understand the value of the kitchen table and the communal areas, and what you're talking about. The best peer environment is a cup of coffee in the morning during shift change, where you're just shooting the shit. So I couldn't agree more.
Before you go on, you mentioned those dorms. I don't know. They concern me. Um, I understand the rest, the relaxation, the privacy, all that's important, but it comes back to the leadership in the firehouse. The leaders in the firehouse have to get those firefighters out of their dorms and to the kitchen table. They've
Absolutely.
got to communicate, and they've got to, become that cohesive team. Because when those dorms started coming into the service, we started seeing a lot of people go off and kind of do their own thing, go in their own little room and not cohabitate and not. So I think it had somewhat of a detrimental effect at the beginning, although it was, well intentioned, and I think it's good. But it's all how you manage it, right? It's all who the leader of that team is and how they manage it. I think that's so important.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the thing. If you can deliberately have times in the day where you're playing bay hockey or working out or, having a meal together, then there's some, time where you're going to go off in that dorm and read for a little bit. That's absolutely fine. No one's saying you got to be out in the communal space the whole time. But yeah, if they're now got a PlayStation in there and you don't see them apart from at calls, then you're missing the point. And then you're not going to forge that camaraderie if you're all, sectioned off in different parts of the station. So I could not agree more. The culture needs to be that we spend a lot of time together. And then it's good to have your own space. You're there 24 hours to be able to call your family and, do a video chat in private. So, but yeah, so same exact facility, but just different ways of using it.
Right.
Well, I want to go to some closing questions and be mindful of your time. The first one I love to ask: is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Well, I think there are a couple of leadership books that I would definitely recommend. I have friends that they continue to, hand me different books to read. They go, here, take a look at this, take a look at that. But I have a huge collection I'm, looking up here. And I think one of them, if I look up, is it's called That It Starts with Food. And it's a great book that talks about nutrition and wellness. And I think that is paramount to somebody's success in this job. That if you don't have the right fuel and are taking care of yourself, you're not going to be in the right frame of mind, and you're going to have a lot of health issues. I think other things to read, whether it's fiction, let's see here. I got a good book on, well, you can't see it, but it's on leadership from John Maxwell. And there are some very good passages in there. And I think that's a book that's been around for a long time, but it still holds true today. And then I was always a fan of reading all of the fire service books. So I would buy every book in the fire service, whether it was Brannigan on building construction or whether it was on strategy and tactics. I always tried to get the latest and greatest and stay up to date on that, because I think that's, what makes our profession so good, is learning, from our past, learning from these firefighters that have all of this experience and all of this knowledge, and trying to pass that on and see what the next best thing is. That's how we've evolved. That's how we've been able to invent new tools, new equipment, new hose, new nozzles. Look at when I started, nobody knew what positive pressure ventilation is. Things like that they just think of as second nature didn't just occur overnight. They came from somebody trying it out. And so I think reading about your profession is very important.
Absolutely. What about TV shows, films, or documentaries that you love?
Well, I like science fiction. So I like to relax when I watch TV. So I guess I'm a big Star Wars fan, big Star Trek fan. I know sometimes that's a negative for some people. You got to be on one side or the other. I kind of like both. So I do a lot of science fiction. As far as documentaries go, I think most recently a really good documentary I saw was on Led Zeppelin. That was amazing. When you look at their journey and how they came together and the music they made and what they did, that was fantastic. And then, of course, when you look at our profession, everybody should go watch Dark Waters, and
Absolutely.
learn about, the PFAS. Very important.
Yeah, 100%. I had Rob Billot on the show probably about 3 years ago now, but it was amazing. Like speaking to him and Diane Cotter, these people that have really been out there. And again, like you said, these become a movement, and a lot of people don't realize, who was at the beginning of that, and the fight that they had, when no one else was listening, when everyone else was calling them crazy or ridiculous or whatever, and then they reveal something like that, and now we're all talking about PFAS. So yeah, kudos to those pioneers. Speaking of amazing people, is there a person that you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Yeah, I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to our general president, but him being a military veteran, I think he would be, an outstanding advocate for the fire service to be able to talk to. Ed Kelly, I think he would be great.
Yeah, I would love to get him on. I've reached out kind of half-heartedly, I guess is the best thing. So I don't know if you have an avenue, but yeah, I think it would be incredible to get him on.
Yeah, and we've had some really, really dynamic speakers at our conferences, and I'd be happy to, share a list of those with you that we've had that have just done some, you know, amazing, work for us.
That would
One
be great. Thank you.
that comes, yeah, one that comes to mind is, the captain of the U.S. Hockey team when they beat Russia. I
Oh,
just saw
really?
him speak. Yeah, so that he was captain of the U.S. Olympic hockey team for that Miracle on Ice, and his son is a firefighter at Logan Airport, and so I think he, brings an interesting perspective where he might be somebody you'd like to talk to about leadership and his life experiences and the fact that his son now is in the fire service.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Yeah, I'd love to connect with him too. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you. What do you do to decompress apart from watching Star Trek and Star Wars?
Well, I love to go on the golf course with my son. We spend time fishing, golf, and I like to just, chill out at home in the backyard. I have a couple of dogs. I go on long walks with my dogs. Um, Probably not as much as they would like me to, but, it's very relaxing to go out and do that. And so I don't, I guess I'm more of a, I'm more engaged 24/7 all the time because even when I go out walking or doing something, I'll take my phone with me. I'll have my earbuds with me. But yeah, that's what I like to do. I enjoy that.
Beautiful. Well, for people listening, if they want to learn more about you, reach out to you, where are the best places online to do that?
So I'm on Facebook. They can reach me on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I have two accounts on Instagram. Um, They can call my cell phone anytime they want. They can reach me at email at wdix@iaff.org. I'm available 24/7, just here to try to help make the fire service better however we can.
Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation. I mean, your career spans, decades, and there's so much value just in that, but also what you've done from the union perspective and some of the, the lens that you brought to some of these things that we're working through today, I think has been invaluable. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thanks, James. I appreciate you too. It's been a pleasure.